All right.
All right. Hi, everybody. Al Iverson here. I am a product management guy, director of products for the Kickbox deliverability suite. My colleague and I, Jennifer Nespola Lantz, are very excited to talk to you today about email list management best practices, and we'll dive into what that all means and what the actual agenda here is in a second. But first, let me kick things off by introducing and handing it over to my good friend, Jen. Take it away.
Hi, all. Very excited to be here. Just to let you know, we may be throwing in some puns along the way, just for fun. Really excited again to do this with Al. Try to give you tips, not just on email list management, how to approach what you currently have, what you might want to bring back, how to build your list, and then what we want to consider for peak. And so we'll see some of that on the agenda.
All right. Aren't you excited for our webinar, Jen? Pun number one. Trying to think of a pumpkin spice pun for my Dunkin', and I'm coming up blank. Sorry. I'll try to work on that.
We'll give them pumpkin to talk about.
Oh, yikes.
Nice.
Oh, that's horrible. All right, so what are we going to walk through today? All the stuff Jen just talked about here, right? What is list hygiene? How does ghoulish data, how does bad data get on your list? How poor list quality can really ruin your night. It's really going to cause you problems and inhibit your ability to get mail delivered successfully. How to cast that doubt out of your list. What spell do you need to get things going in the right direction? And then what about list building, right? It's all about list growth at the end of the day. You need people to be able to send mail to if you're going to be a successful email marketer. We'll touch on that as well. Resurrection is a theme for today as well. We're going to talk about bringing back emails from the dead and preparing for peak email season. We know that's what Q4, right? It's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, all of this stuff all going on, and more all at once. It's really it is the end game. It is the big game when it comes to email marketing in Q4.
So we'll start by just talking about what list hygiene is. So fasten your sheet belts. My ghost one. I'm going to enjoy this. I'm sorry. But basically list hygiene is the removal, the ongoing removal. It shouldn't just be one time of poor quality emails, and trying to prevent bad emails from getting into your list to begin with. And there's a few, there's 4 here that are your basic ways to go through and do your list hygiene, take care of it. We've got verification services that can be done in batch. That's often done when you have lists that maybe through an acquisition or a partnership, or you're targeting people that maybe you've put on the side for a little while. So the batch helps to just review, like, are these emails still in existence? Are they still valuable? We have bounce management that's often controlled by your ESP provider. And that is basically when you get the feedback after you mail to an email, when you get that feedback, what do you do with it? Do you keep it on your list? Do you invalidate them? Do you unsubscribe them? What information are they sending back to you to tell you about the quality of those emails that you're mailing? A list analysis and repermission. So this is basically really diving into all of your data about your list, data about actions, and then what do you do? How can you repermission? So there's inevitably going to be something that crawls into your list that you may not want, and repermissions are one way to help pull that out. And then the last one, I'm so sorry about that. Trying to get my little button here. Your subscription management. So that's making sure that that's on the incoming, to make sure that you're really providing a proper subscription flow so that people who are coming in understand what they're subscribing to, but then you're also protecting that flow through other means. And we're going to dig into each of these as well as we go along. But that's a nice little high level. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about how does this data get on your list to begin with? And there's a number of ways that can happen. So if you purchase a list, that's a big one. And that's one reason why it's really frowned upon, outside of the fact that they don't really have true consent. But purchase lists, depending on, how they're collected and aggregated, there's often one, you've got people, again, who may not expecting mail from you. So that is not good data because they're going to complain. But you might have emails that no longer exist anymore, that they were scraped from the web. You have no idea how this data was collected necessarily. So the quality of that could really degrade your performance. Point of sale is another place where you get your email. And why could that be a vector for getting ghoulish data? Well, if you're typing or if you're asking someone what their address is, one of your personnel is asking and they get the response, they may mishear the word or the letter, and that gets typed in incorrectly. Online forms that don't have any protection, whether it's email verification or CAPTCHA or using confirmed opt-ins to protect and confirm the data coming in is accurate, those can also bring in poor data. And that could be through typos. It could be through malicious activities and bots who say, I want to just put bad data on there for many reasons that are outside just adding bad data to your list. Poor onboarding. So if you don't have the welcome experience in a way that sets the expectations, you could result in complaints and a lot of unsubscribes. Aren't necessarily a bad thing, but then it doesn't really add value to your list. So you want to have a really good onboarding. Old data, everyone's going to have it. So you're going to have your data, and eventually it's going to age in a way that you're going to either maintain it or it needs to be pulled out because there's a metric around 30%. Let's say 20 to 30% of your emails are going to churn every year. So there's a good reason why there's bounce processing and other techniques that we're going to take you through to go through that old data to see what's still valuable to you. And then acquisition and poor partnerships. So I often hear, well, we're working with a partner and we've got everything legally sound around this data and we can use it. But just because it's legal doesn't mean it's good quality data. And so that's really important to understand as well, because you're often getting emails that even, again, if they're legally compliant to mail, it's the expectations. And what deliverability is all about is what your customers are doing once they get that mail, because that drives what happens to your mail. If people aren't expecting it and they complain, it's going to be a big red flag to the mailbox providers. So this is why, and we're starting to touch on it, and I covered a little bit of how you can, why list quality can get you into trouble when you're mailing. If you mail poor quality emails, and again, that's either they're not valid, they don't exist, you're hitting typos, you're hitting spam traps, you're getting a lot of complaints, they're all negative signals from mailbox providers. And it makes you look like a spammer or a spammer. Or maybe you are a spammer. So those are all things that for them, they're looking at it to say, is what's coming into my system wanted? Is it quality? Because the goal of a mailbox provider or filtering appliance is to make their customers happy. So they need to make sure they're also protecting them from abuse and other things that come in through their system. Spammers really look for quality and not quantity. So that's why the quality is really the spammers look for quantity, not quality. And that's why the quality is so important here. And so we have a few signals that you can identify when you do have list quality issues, because that might be a question that you have. How do I know if my list is good or bad? So some of the signals that you'll have: spam traps, high bounce rate, complaint rate, and unsubscribe rate. So once you start mailing them, what's happening post mail? If you're mailing to inactive accounts, and you'll see a lot of that in your bounces. And then mailing to unengaged customers. So over time, you'll get history from these emails of what they're doing. You'll know if you're mailing engaged or not. And it doesn't even have to always be mailed unengaged through your email, but are they unengaged with your brand through all the other sources? And some of the spam traps you'll identify too, because you'll start seeing block lists.
Hey, Jen.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd love to add my 2 cents here too. I think it's important to talk about, why do we talk about signals? And that's because these mailbox providers, these ISPs, are also very signal oriented. They are looking for individualistic feedback from their subscribers. That's what drives the whole engine, the whole enterprise. In so many cases, Gmail is sort of the leading edge of that, but a lot of other places do it as well. And that's really the key there, that they are very receptive to these bits of feedback given to them by subscribers, both the positive and negative. Those negative signals in particular count a lot against a subscriber. It can be unfair. Sometimes it could be totally legal. It can be stuff that people did sign up for. But if you are enraging a subscriber base enough to get more complaints percentage-wise than the other guy, you're likely to run into trouble.
Excellent. So we touched on spam traps, but let's dive into that a little bit more, because that really is a huge signal. Spam traps are often why you're on block lists, and block lists are, like Al said, another signal to mailbox providers about who you are and the quality of your mail. So spam traps are, depending on your point of view, bad email addresses, probably for marketers. They're good for the anti-abuse, but they're not real. They're not real people. And they don't subscribe to your list, but they can still get on your list. Typo addresses and domains, and it could be innocent. Someone could accidentally type something in incorrectly. So just because you have them, it doesn't mean that your program is necessarily bad, but there's something along the way that needs to be done to help quantify those addresses. Recycled addresses and domains. And so what recycled addresses mean, these potentially were real customers at some point, but the account was abandoned. And usually there's a time period where you'll mail to it and you'll get bounce backs that say this is no longer valid. Again, this goes into bounce management. What do you do with that mail? Because at some point, some providers or other blocklist agencies, they'll take those and they'll reactivate them. So then when you start to mail them, yes, they were a customer at some point, and now they're active again, and you're not getting that negative signal that you shouldn't be mailing them anymore. But it's a signal to those who are operating that trap that, hey, their mail's coming in that probably shouldn't be anymore. And then there's pristine and pure addresses and domains. Those can get into your account, again, by accident. It could come through purchase lists. It could come from a malicious attack that's through an uncompromised form, or if you're not performing confirmed opt-in. So there's many ways they can get on your list. But again, as you start to do this list management, it helps to pull all these things out. So the goal is that you want to minimize your trap problems. Again, you don't want to buy lists. That's a big one. You don't want to hang on to subscribers forever. So for example, if you have an address and then you park them for a little bit because they haven't been engaging and you don't mail them for a long time, you may never get that bounce. And then you start mailing them again because you're not letting them go. So those are things that can keep that bad data on your list. And, the one way that will always be helpful is doing those confirmed opt-ins or your double opt-in, because then you're saying, do you really want this mail? I think it's wishful thinking to assume you'll ever identify, all traps, that you'll be able to find them. And I do know, I've talked to a number of people that in part of the services they use, they really want to know, what's the trap? I want to find it in my list and get rid of it. But the reality is you're never going to find all your traps. They're guarded. They're heavily guarded for a reason. And the idea is that you don't necessarily need to find all of the traps, but if you put the right strategies, if you put the right behaviors in place behind your program, you're going to minimize that. You're going to limit the amount of times that you touch them, and it's going to also help your deliverability. So it's going to naturally let them fall out of your program when you do some of these steps.
Exactly. Just to add my 2 cents there too, it is so important to keep in mind that fixing a spam trap problem is not a hunt for an individual address. It's fixing your subscription sign-up processes. It's fixing your subscriber lifecycle management process. It's implementing sunsetting for invalid and non-responsive addresses. There's a whole bunch of strategy that if you apply it there, you actually you leave the cruft behind. You leave the bad stuff, and you end up with a list that's going to be spam trap free.
So Al, can you jump into the casting the doubt out of your list?
No, thank you. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so let's talk about, like I just hit on there, what are the things you can do to ensure that your list is as clean as possible. One of the biggest steps, most important steps from my perspective here, might have a bias because I work for Kickbox. I'm going to be open about that. I like money. Money is really spooky. No, that's not a pun. But verification services do actually help significantly to improve your data sources, improve your data cleanliness. They're not a magic spam trap removal engine. The thing, there's the thing with spam traps is tons of different people run spam trap networks, have spam trap addresses. Sometimes when you're doing data analysis, you stumble across one and it's very easy to suppress it. That's one out of a dozen big ones and dozens of little ones. So you're never just going to push a button or put your thumb down on the data and identify all the spam traps. But there is still a lot you can do with tools like our verification to identify and keep most of the bad addresses from ending up in your mail stream. Think about risky addresses there, right? Disposable addresses, typos, and domains that don't render, right? There's the key there to reading verification results, for example. It's very obvious. Undeliverable addresses, don't include those. But also think about not allowing through disposable addresses, stuff like your mailinator, your one-time use addresses that are like little codes that are just meant to give to one website. Those people tend not to want an ongoing engagement with the sender, and they're more likely to report mail as spam. And those services are more likely to repurpose those addresses into spam traps. So that's sort of a next level thing you can do with verification to help minimize your pain, is to disallow disposable addresses. Now, if you're doing it in batch, of course, it means throwing away some number of addresses that were already given to you. And that's where the API can help save you from problems like that. If you can implement verification via the API as part of your sign up or registration process, that means that you can correct subscribers when they try to enter an address that is either invalid or an address that you don't want to allow through for whatever reason. So that's where verification at the time of capture is most important, is that it reduces the chance that you're going to have to throw away an address and lets you give a potential subscriber, a chance to enter a correct address. And keep in mind here too, we're talking more about resurrection in a little bit, but the last bit there, Jen, can you go back for 1 second? The last bit here I really want to hit on is dumping anything questionable when you're trying to re-engage or win back subscribers, right? What does that mean? That means that if you have your legacy database, super old, super crusty, the goal is not to try to squeeze life out of every single address. What you need to do is be conservative and look for criteria that identify segments that you don't want to mail. Leave the worst of the worst behind. Don't try to don't try to squeeze life out of every single address. So what does a verification actually tell you, right? Like obviously it tells you invalid addresses, disposable domains. I talked about those. There's also free domains, which is your Gmail, your Hotmail, your Yahoo. There's actually hundreds of those, because there's not only are there many providers, I can think of at least a dozen big ones top of my head, half of them you might not have heard of, but some of them have hundreds of domains. Did you know that? I mean, Gmail has 2 domains, Gmail and googlemail.com, but Yahoo has hundreds of domains, but more than 100, close to 200 domains. Microsoft, Hotmail, Outlook.com has close to 200 domains. Some of them, they allow active signups today. Some of them they don't, right? But some of these guys used to have local versions of yahoo.com, yahoo.co.uk, yahoo.fr, etc. And even if they don't allow new signups, people that already had those addresses get to keep them. So there are hundreds of domains out there that are all part of the free webmail ecosystem. So if you're running a B2B list and you want to encourage people to sign up from their work domain and not a free mail domain, this is your opportunity to identify and correct that. And that's where the API comes in handy again too, so that you can do it during the sign-up process and not sort of lose a subscriber opportunity, but actually give them a chance to correct it. Next bit there, role accounts. Role account means sales at kickbox.com, marketing at kickbox.com, etc. right? Anything that's a department or a process instead of a person. Now, what you do with those depends on what your target focus is, what your target market is. What I found in my days working on Pardot, the little B2B platform for Salesforce, is that B2B companies sign up with role addresses. They sign up for a service for their company as sales at or owner at or whatever. So you don't necessarily want to block those. But B2C subscriber base, in my history with ExactTarget and Salesforce Marketing Cloud, I found that when people submit those addresses to B2C lists, they tend to be garbage. It tends to be a sign of a poor list, bad hygiene, bad subscription attempts, anything related to poor deliverability. There's, I never exactly cracked the code to know for sure that it means that a bot dropped it in, nothing like that. But there was definitely a preponderance of higher spam complaints, more likely deliverability issues when people are submitting role addresses to B2C lists. So that tells me that my guidance there, the way I would do it is I would disallow role addresses in a B2C sign up, and I would allow role addresses in a B2B sign up. That's an example of how you get granular with the verification results and do some fun stuff to get very specific to your use case.
Now, just to add to that too, some of the experience I had with role accounts were also, they would allow for transactional. So maybe you have an account sign up, but you allow them from or disallow them from your marketing communications, because also then you have to try to determine consent too, because role account could go to many people, and that could create confusion even within that group if one person is doing that. So even within your streams, you may want to customize how you want to use the results that you get from verification about your emails.
And then finally, thanks, Jen. And then finally, what about unknowns? And it's important to highlight unknowns because we don't charge you for them. It literally means we weren't able to figure it out. And it does happen sometimes. The remote ISP that we're trying to connect to validate an address, to verify it, it could be non-responsive at that exact second. ISPs do have downtimes. So we don't charge you for unknown results. And you're free to, and we even recommend retrying unknowns, especially if you're doing it in a batch and you got part of the batch comes back unknown. Wait a few minutes to a few hours or even the next day and try that unknown segment again, because it won't cost you any money. It only costs you verification credits if we successfully verify it as good or bad. So if it comes back unknown, we couldn't figure it out, so feel free to retry it. Bounce management. Oh boy, if I had $1 for every time I talked about why a message bounced in my 15 to 20 years of dealing with bounce management issues back at my ESP platform days, I would have at least $3. It comes up a lot, let me tell you. Bounce management is very important, and I'm going to start at the bottom and work backwards here. Right? Don't override your send platform unless you really are an expert and you know what you're doing. There are reasons to override bounces and retry to send to bouncing addresses, but they are rare. And again, you have to know what you're doing. I can't tell you the number of times platforms will catch this. I can tell you the number of times that a client would have tried to take a big old bad list of all of their bounces for the last 5 years and try to resend to it. And ironically, the bounce rate is not 100%. Some tiny percentage of those will get through the nature of the universe. As Jen said, addresses churn. So keep in mind that those are not necessarily the same people on the other end of the wire as they were before. And then addresses bounce one day and not another for lots of weird reasons, including spam blocking and broken stuff at an ISP and so forth. But the problem there is that you're emitting a mail stream, an attempted mail stream that is almost entirely bounces. That is a hugely negative reputation indicator to ISPs. So if they see nothing but, if they see an IP or a domain connecting to them and sending nothing but invalid addresses attempts at one after another after another, that is so bad for your reputation. Microsoft, if you do it a certain way, which is very easy to do, you end up being tagged by Microsoft as engaging in something called namespace mining. And it's very hard to crawl back out of that hole when you get tagged with that. And so that's why you can't just pick up your big list of bouncing addresses and try to send to it again.
And
So always trust the platform as much as possible. Jen, yeah.
So I was just going to add that it's not even about, or not, it's more than, in addition to the mailbox providers, you also have to consider the relationship with your ESP as well, because if they are bouncing and you're not adhering to their recommendations and you continually bounce and you're ignoring that, you could also be falling out of your AUP. They could kick you off their platform, because they too have to protect what's going out of their system. So bounce processing, they have their rules in place for a reason. And what Al's going to get to next is it's best to talk to them and not ignore what they're doing.
And that actually happened to me once. I was working for a company that was sending through responses long before the Oracle acquisition. And we tried to resurrect and send to bounces and had a 95% bounce rate. And responses shut off the send and called me and yelled at me. So I don't, everybody has scaled up a little bit since then. I doubt they personally call and yell at each client who tries to do that, but you're not suddenly likely to have success with that. List analysis, repermissioning. Think about what you can do to actually start the process to re-engage your list, to take the big chunk of subscribers that are not showing a sign of life and get something back from them. And it starts by what you can identify as live subscribers in your database, and segmenting out specifically people where you actually have signs of life from them, positive engagement signals, opens, clicks, engagements, so forth. Direct engagements with the email message are always best, even with the potential inaccuracy added by Apple and MPP. But when you don't always have direct email engagement, website engagement can be an okay sort of secondary engagement measure to go along with that. Think of people, if they haven't logged into your website in the last 2 years, they're less likely to be interested, engaged, or still there on the other end of the email address versus people who logged in as recently as 3 days ago, right? That's a different ballgame. So there's an example there of how you can look at alternate engagement indicators to identify signs of life for a subscriber segment that is essentially going to end up being your most safe to mail segment, right? And here's a good question here in the chat. I'm going to steal that right now. How do you handle false positives with opens that result from email security software? And that's both. And it ties in with Apple MPP too, right? With Apple MPP greatly inflated opens because they pull everything through their proxy service. Same thing, you run into potential issues with Trend Micro, Microsoft, and others inflating clicks by following all the links, looking for malware and so forth. And that can be tricky. And what you really have to do there is rely on your platform's help a little bit, or look up in their support. Like Pardot has. Oh God, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but Pardot has a specific little tool that will help you identify bot clicks and suppress them out of your engagement metrics. So a lot of other platforms have that too. That's the key there, is to try to get rid of those as much as possible. And also, if you can identify the sends or people that might have triggered the 10,000 clicks, right, then do your best to exclude that from it. And last bits on this slide here too. The whole key here is really to, as Jen talked about, spam trap hunt. This is the successful way to do it. Is apply strategy to save what you can from non-engaged subscribers, and then eventually suppressing the rest of them. And this is part of how you do that. This is how you get your list back down to its core of people where you have. You've regained consent essentially by getting a click or a sign of activity where they click stay on the list and they're actively engaged with you. And that's really going to kill spam complaint problems and spam trap problems dead. Subscription management is very important. And what does that all mean? Think about your unsub. Is it easy to unsub? If your unsub is hidden in the footer, if it's 14 inches down, if it's light gray on a light gray background, if it's below Gmail clipping, are people going to hunt for it? No, they're just going to hit the report spam button. The report spam is the thing that people jump to when they're mad about you, and making it hard to unsub is a very quick way to make people mad about your mail. So make it very easy. If you are having trouble with high spam complaints, one of the things you can do is put a very clear and obvious unsubscribe banner at the top of emails, and it'll make it easier for people to just say, click, I'm done. And it gives them an opportunity to get off the list without saying that they hate your guts. So if you're in that middle ground where you've got a high complaint rate, but it's all opt-in, maybe you just haven't talked to people for a while, that's a good potential alternate option there, is to make that unsub just so blatantly obvious at the top that it'll reduce the chances that people are going to report mail as spam. And of course, subscription setting expectations helps to prevent that as well, right? If people know what they're signing up for, and they're not going to be surprised by the branding, the sender, the cadence, any of that stuff. None of it should be a surprise to them. If I sign up for emails from you, I shouldn't start getting emails from Jen instead. It's poor branding, right? The further you go from best practices for branding and expectations, the more likely you are to have a deliverability issue. And a lot of people tell us that, boy, I wish I had a way to just tell them to send me less emails and not just email me every day. I don't want all or nothing. Is there anything in between? And that's where opt-down comes in, where you think of opt-down being the unsubscribe process leads to a subscription profile center, and that profile center lets the subscriber say, I only want to know either about these topics, these brands, or only email me this often. So you can say only email me weekly instead of daily. That's an example of opt-down. You do that, and you save that subscriber. You save that chance to email them again in the future, which you would have lost otherwise. And finally here, FBLs are ISP feedback loops. These are what happens when somebody hits that report spam button. Savvy platforms, savvy ESPs and CRMs sign up, they register with Yahoo, with Microsoft, with Comcast, with a whole bunch of other top volume ISPs to get this feedback back from them and allow you to unsubscribe people who report mail as spam. So this is something that your platform should be either helping you with or managing for you. Make sure you talk to them and ask them about ISP feedback loops. They are important, because if you don't unsubscribe somebody who's complaining, they can keep complaining. More complaints equals poorer reputation equals greater chance of deliverability issues.
Awesome. And to add to your comment about unsubscribes, if you should check with your provider too. You can even see it in the headers, but if you don't know how to look, ask them if you have list unsubscribe enabled on your emails. That is something that mailbox providers, Yahoo and Gmail specifically, they use that to either put a notification. Gmail, for example, right as you open up an email, it'll say unsubscribe. It's a great way to give them another option instead of jumping to that spam complaint button. And Yahoo uses that as well. And they have a little in their new interface as they're building it out. They have a subscription page or tab, especially on the mobile app, where you can go through all of your senders and then you can unsubscribe from there. And they use that list unsubscribe to do that. So mailbox providers are also coming up with ways to make interacting with email easier so that they can get more accurate signals of what a customer wants versus, they're aware that sometimes people hit spam complaint just because they don't want to have to hunt for that unsubscribe, or it's an easy way to delete. So using other attributes that you provide in the email can help them say, how do we make unsubscribe easier so that when a complaint comes in, we know it's a true, very dissatisfied customer providing feedback on this. So one thing to keep in mind is we have to think about list building. So we've talked about, you have your list. How do you prevent the bad data from coming in? How do you make sure you kind of maintain it once you have it and that you can clean it out a little bit? But also, how do you build your list? What goes into that? So list hygiene, you can't really get there if you don't start with consent at the point of collection. You have to have proper consent, because you could do all the list hygiene in the world, but without consent, you're going to generate negative signals, complaints, no interaction, delete, all those things that you're telling the providers you don't want the mail. So start with consent. when you first get that email. And then you want to protect your list from database poisoning and low quality interest. So those are things that you want to put into it as you start to build your list. And it also requires a lot of transparency. It creates clarity for your customers. And Al was mentioning that about, making sure you're very clear about what you're subscribing to, but it also adds it for your list. So, quality starts at the top of the funnel. So we're going to talk about each of these: form protection, verification, short-term incentives, what they can do, and then expectation setting. So when we look at this, and fun little cauldron here, with form protection, things you can do: CAPTCHA, honeypot fields. And what that means is on your CAPTCHA form, you actually have a field to fill out, but it's hidden. And only bots who are not looking at that form would probably fill it out and submit it. And so those are ways to easily pull out inputs that aren't true customers or true interest. Confirmed opt-in. So you get the email, you write back, thanks for your subscription interest, please confirm, or whatever verbiage you want to use that you would like to remain on our list. Then you want to get rid of disposables. We talked about with verification, what you can do. You want to get rid of typos, anything to kind of weed out the emails that aren't going to add quality. And disposables, again, they're not, you might hear disposables in the sense of like Apple MPP with protecting the email and that people can create these anonymized email addresses. Yes, they can be disposables, but you have to think about people want privacy. So sometimes they create additional addresses that don't put their names in it. Or sometimes they know that they're going to get inundated with emails. So they have a secondary email address, which technically could be considered disposable. So the disposables you want to get rid of are the ones that are expiring after like a day, or those services that really have a shared mailbox or something that's not really a customer. You want to think about the short-term incentives you give. So if you're doing a lot of sweepstakes, or you're doing a ton of coupons, those can actually give you addresses that are disposables, or those who are those secondary addresses that people really don't want to maintain or they're not going to interact with. So you want to make sure that when you're providing the incentives, that you're providing something that creates loyalty and something a little bit fabulous for your customers. Sorry. And then, Al touched on a lot of this stuff about expectation settings. Are you giving them preferences? Are you allowing them to opt down, or what they're opting in? Are you telling them what they opt in? If you are a brand that has multiple sub-brands and they subscribe, are you automatically subscribing to all the brands? And so I think of Gap, for example. They have Old Navy, Gap, Banana Republic, and Athleta. If I subscribe to one, my expectation is I'm subscribed to one. So match to what the expectations are. Not just what you're specifying, but what their expectations are and assumptions when you go through. And you can ask your customers, when you sign up, what are you expecting? Are we being clear? The cadence, make sure they're aware of the cadence. You could be signing up saying, oh, awesome coupons, but you may not realize that you're getting 2 emails a day. So be clear about how often you're mailing them. And that could also be something in the preference of how often you get mailed. Your sending address, be clear on who you're sending from. And Al mentioned it too. You don't want to constantly change that. Some people add that to their address book, and that helps your deliverability. So, and also when you send something, if you tell them I'm sending from this address, go look in your spam folder. Again, you're setting expectations of what they're going to be receiving and what they should do with that. What are the benefits? And I don't know if enough people clarify that upon sign up, or even with that confirmation thank you of this is the benefit of being on our list. If you sign up for a coupon, you may think I get the coupon, but I'm not going to get anything else. So what more can you give them to show the benefits to make them a lasting subscriber instead of this temporary, maybe fleeting customer that might fly away or something? And then also content, be clear on what you're providing in the content. You want to make sure you have all the right ingredients in place to keep them. Again, loyalty is what's going to keep these customers on your list and interacting. And so part of building your list requires driving traffic. You need to really drive the traffic. Think about what can you do with SEO or social media to drive the traffic to your email list. And then your email needs to keep that traffic and manage it properly. It's got to be easy to sign up when you get the traffic. So if you are going to put initiatives to drive it, make sure your system's ready for it, that your websites are ready for it, that it's easy too, that they don't have to go search. And I've been on a few newsletters. I knew there were newsletters. I went to the site and I had to do a special Google search just to find where I could sign up for the newsletters. I shouldn't have to search to find where I can sign up. It should be clear of where you need to go. Even if that requires a couple clicks, it should be very simple to sign up here. You sign up and then maybe take them somewhere if you have a big path of things they could choose from. But it shouldn't be something that's, otherwise you're just putting up a wall and it's making it harder. People are not going to spend that much time looking for your list. Instead, they're going to move on. You're going to want to offer value. So, what's the incentive? Is it a discount? And again, is it an incentive that's going to be long lasting? You want to drive loyalty. What can you do beyond just a one-time discount? What's valuable to your customers? And ask them, what's valuable to you? What do you want from us? And to keep them engaged with your brand, because maybe they're not buying all the time, but you want them to know about your brand, what's changing, what's available, and how your content can help them, even if it's outside of the buying cycle. What can you do that's valuable? And then fear the purchase list. Don't buy them. Don't buy lists. We've said that a couple of times. They're just going to be the death of your program if you do that. And then that even if you're like, well, I'll just do it once and then I'll try to, beg for forgiveness later. Sometimes it doesn't work that easily or at all. And if you try to move IPs or domains, that stuff's just going to travel with you because the purchase lists are going to be bad for your reputation. And so MailChimp, if you'd like, you can look at this link later on, but MailChimp has a great resource on how to build your email list. And then also there was, it was posted in one of the public industry forums. It was a really great case study on how this gentleman, Gunnar, grew his newsletter from 0 to 10,000. And I love how he did it. And the key that I took away from it is he had very specific and valuable content that was addressed to a specific audience. Like, these are things to do in your neighborhood. So they wanted it, they were interested in it. And it wasn't a blast to everyone. It was very targeted. And he grew his list from there. It's a really great little case study. So I'd take a few minutes to look at it on Twitter.
And he's cool for two reasons. The first being, of course, that his name is Gunnar. So this might be a little bit of deja vu, but let's touch on the best path to resurrecting an email address or resurrecting your email list. What can you save from your legacy database, right? We talked about identifying the engaged subscribers and setting them aside, verifying what you can to get rid of what we know has turned bad, has turned sour since the time of original sign up. That'll help eliminate some of the cruft and help get you back closer to good data practices, good database. Split groups by engagement signals and define a cutoff. The cutoff bit is important. I think there are people out there who love to tell you, email everybody. I don't care if they haven't opened in 5 years. It's so important to get your brand in front of them. And then you talk to those people and they even secretly tell you, oh, well, we don't actually go that far back. We cut them off after 1 year or 2 years or 36 months or whatever. So be wary of people that just tell you to email everything forever, regardless of engagement signals. Engagement signals are used by the mailbox providers to decide who gets their mail delivered. So if you ignore those, you put yourself at a disadvantage. And be wary of people that tell you to ignore them. They may or may not know what they're talking about. There's always people out there smarter than me. So don't always assume that I'm right, but a person telling you otherwise in this one is wrong and full of beans. Re-permission or say goodbye. We'll touch on win-backs. In fact, go ahead and skip to the next slide, Jen, and we'll go directly to win-backs here. The key here is to try to get a response from people who had not responded previously. And a win-back campaign is a great way to do that. You can even think of it, have a long-term drip campaign process as part of your life cycle subscription management process, right? If people don't respond, say after 18 months, drop them into a series of 1 or 2 or 3 win-back campaigns, spread out maybe 7 to 10 days apart. I would do probably 1 or 2, and look for a sign of life. What you're trying to do is to get people to engage and interact, positively respond to your emails. Literally, just please come back. We'll give you 10% off. 1-800-contacts, a friend of ours in one of the industry forums pointed out that they do really punny and cool win-back campaigns where they tell people, oh, you're not buying contacts anymore. Did you get LASIK? And so anything that engages that audience and gets them to look closer at what you're doing, that's what you're trying to do. That's the end game here, is to get a sign of life out of these subscribers who've not been responding otherwise. So think of what you can do to incent or engage that subscriber base. And there's a zillion examples of how to do that out there. And instead of go through 20 different ones, I'll just link here to our friends at Klaviyo, who's got a great example of how to get started and some good examples with win-back email campaigns.
And make sure those win-back campaigns are irresistible.
Oh. Oh my God, know when enough is enough, and just know when to let those puns die.
Fine, I guess that's a good point. And to Al's point, as he was talking about before, you need to, a cutoff is really important, and retiring is best because there's really nobody home. I mean, and you look at the life cycle of your campaigns and your product, and if after 3 years or 4 years, do you really want to be mailing them? Or consider alternate strategies. So is there something else that you can do to reach out to them, especially if they might be a little bit more risky? How can you create a custom flow for those? So maybe you're not mailing them as much, or in smaller segments, and everything carries a risk when you start to reach out to these unengaged customers. No email addresses forever. And I was working with a client before, and they mailed, they were coming from the management. They had to mail over 600,000 who have not been engaged in 3, 4 or more years. They did a campaign and they got, I think, 200 people from it. So 0.04%. And so they really didn't get, and that wasn't necessarily that they bought anything, just that they engaged. So you don't know, like maybe they're engaging and then they'll negatively engage afterwards. So you have to really understand, and and if you're a company that, let's say you work with pets or something, if they're not engaging after 3 years, did something personal happen to their pet? Do you really want to keep pushing on that? So, leave the door open for them to come back, but also understand, at this point, we need to maybe just say goodbye for now, and then we'll rekindle later if needed. And so I think Al and I can both touch on this a little bit. And this is one of our last slides, I believe. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So getting ready for peak season, and list management is really key to a lot of that, because you want to plan, you need to be flexible, but you need to have that good data before you go in. You need to have that engagement and that quality. It's not the time of the year to just open the floodgates. Everyone expects that they're going to get more mail. Mailbox providers understand that. Customers look for it. They know they're looking for their coupons, they're looking for the sales, but it's also not the time of the year to just constantly hit them for many reasons. Sometimes it just puts a lot of weight on the mailbox providers, and then you get deferrals. And also, if I have an inbox and now it's so flooded, I can't find stuff, that makes a really bad experience as well. So some of the things I'll quickly touch on. Make sure you're segmenting based on engagement and preferences, all the data points that you already know. Really, focus on those who are going to engage and help drive that revenue, and then focus on the other ones in a different way to say, they disengaged for a reason, or you might find that some of those who disengage are only disengaged throughout the year and they're heavily engaged. So look at your past data as well and see what kind of cyclical actions are happening. Make sure that you ramp up volume, and that includes cadence, that you don't just slam it hard on those big sending days. I mean, at this point, everybody's shopping now, and they're going to be shopping through the end of the peak season at the end of December into the new year. So you can easily ramp up because people are starting to look, they're starting to shop, and, be flexible with your send times. It's easy to schedule on the hour or on the half hour, but that actually, a lot of senders do that, which means you're creating a lot of traffic for the mailbox providers, and that creates deferrals. And if you have anything time sensitive, you now could be hindering that messaging. If you just move it back 6 minutes or 10 minutes or 11 or something that's different than what the typical send times are, it does actually help. And we've heard this from mailbox providers themselves, them manage the mail so that they can actually process it and move through it a little easier. And then also make sure you're monitoring along the way. You're monitoring your customer signals, monitor your mailbox provider signals, and adjust. And that's where the flexibility comes in. You may not like the adjustment, but if you don't adjust, and Yahoo says this publicly, if you don't listen to our deferrals, you will move into a block. So make sure you're responding appropriately, even if it puts a little strain. And I know that's really hard for those who are in the trenches, but it will create an end result that's much more preferable than if you ignore it.
I would add too, if you want to make sure that the peak season is scale of fun, keep in mind that it is not the time to experiment, not the time for new IPs, not the time for new domains, not the time for significantly different new strategy. You should definitely test strategy over time, of course, and improve your marketing abilities, what you're doing, what you're sending, and who you're sending it to. But test ahead. You should be wrapping up testing right about now and locking stuff in for the last couple of months of the year. That's the best, safest path to success, is to minimize significant changes that could trip you up and run into issues that are going to take time to fix. If you have a problem with a new IP or domain, it's going to take a handful of weeks to fix, and that could really damage your ability to successfully execute marketing campaigns in the last 2 months of the year. So please keep that in mind.
And if you'd like to learn more, tons of resources. We've got our Kickbox blog, Al's blog, spam resource. We've got our free tester that you can go and test out your email for authentication, block lists, content, all that good stuff. Verification on our deliverability suite, please reach out. We're here. And then let us know if you have any questions, or if you want to look at the tool. We're definitely here to help.
Thank you.
We have 5 minutes.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. So we do have a few more minutes left for Q&A. So we'll go ahead and jump into that. But thank you all. Thank you, Al and Jen, for putting that on. That was fantastic. But
ouch.
we got you. Okay. So on to the question. So first one, Al, I think you just kind of answered this one, but maybe you could elaborate on it. Somebody asked suggestions for integration or integrating with HubSpot. Should you use a new IP or existing IP? Ramping up.
Yeah, it depends on how, if you're going live today, shared IPs are probably better for you. But if you have millions of subscribers, if you're sending at least a couple 100,000 messages a month, you could benefit from a dedicated IP. It's just that right this second is probably not the best time to start that month-long IP warming process. So, and frankly, the last couple months of the year are not really the best time to switch ESPs. Do what you got to do, right? Some people, in a relationship goes sour, a platform goes down. But it's much better if you can start it right after the holidays and start warming that up. So if I had to jump ship today, I would probably start off on shared and have a strategic plan to move to dedicated if I had enough volume to support it.
Yeah, to add to that, someone asked me once before about warming around this time. And if you have to, I would keep in mind, try to be mailing off your dual platforms. Try not to do a hard cut, because you do need that time to warm. And while you're warming, you can still maintain your streams and your messaging through your current provider. And so if something happens or you struggle in warming, you need something to fall back, because it's just such a crucial time for a lot of retailers, at least, and some other senders, that this is the time where communications happen. If this is not a time that you thrive in, then it probably doesn't matter so much. But there's a lot going on in the mailbox providers. So just keep that in mind as well. And one other thing in our holiday webinar that we talked about too is that mailbox providers are busy too. So sometimes things can slow down. And if you have more questions on peak, check out our past recording on that too.
So great points. Thank you. Another one about spam traps. You mentioned spam traps in a previous slide, but how do you handle those? Like, can you just identify them and remove them from your list? I mean, how does that work?
That's what people always want to do, right? They want to know what's the bad address and get rid of it. And the people that run the spam trap networks would say, that's not why they do it. That's not what it shows. It's a canary in the coal mine that shows that you have list hygiene issues, that you have bad data. If you remove the spam trap, you still have the other bad data in there, that other typos and other bad addresses and other addresses of people that don't actually want the mail. So if you apply repermissioning strategy, engagement strategy, better verification, better processes, all the way from sign up through lifecycle subscriber management, that's the way to get rid of spam traps. So don't waste your time trying to hunt down a specific address. You might find it, but that address was meant to be a warning. Like not everybody running a spam trap network is using it to filter your mail. There's some of us, that includes us, we're working on our own spam trap network here at Kickbox. The goal is to give senders feedback. And that feedback says you have a list management problem, not that you just have a bad spam trap address you have to get rid of.
Yeah, I guess it's really important to understand, what's the proxy, the canary in the coal mine, like you mentioned, from the actual root of the problem, the cause of it. And we'll go with, I think I have one more. So you talked about like resurrecting, email addresses from the dead. Do you have any other tips or kind of like, any other like specific criteria? Who should you send to? Is there like a certain time frame of engagement, or any other things you could elaborate on? Like, okay, if I'm going to pull a list, what do I pull for re-engagement?
I would start with first understanding the life cycle of your product and how long realistically people stay with you. Because again, you're going to potentially want to cap. You may get directives from above that you have to mail no matter what. So what I like to do is whatever you're mailing today. So if you've capped it at a year and you're getting directive to mail beyond that, chunk it in segments and say, I want engagement from a year ago to a year and a half ago, or even less than that, depending on the size of the audience and how that's going to balance with your current mailing. Do it slowly and see the engagement and how the turn is, and the percentage that you're getting back, so you can report to say, okay, this one was successful or it was not. And watch very carefully, granularly, and then also pan out to see what are the overall performance, because you may find that stopping point where you're like, we went from gaining 2% and now we're at 0.0002. And that at that point, if you go beyond it, or if you see spikes in complaints or something, anything beyond that's going to cause some detrimental harm. So being able to do it slowly and in chunks, you can identify when you need to stop, and then you can justify it to say, I'm seeing this degradation, or I'm seeing these results, and we're not getting anything positive. How else can we reach out to them through other types of targeting or SEO or other means that we can pull them back in? Because it may not be through email.
That is a beautiful response.
All right, we're done. No, that brings us right to time. So we really appreciate, thank you, Al and Jen, for sharing your knowledge. Shelly says she's going to go back and watch the recording again and again. Lots of really good references. So that's good feedback. So really appreciate you all sharing your expertise. Thank you for everybody for attending. We will send a follow-up with the recording and also the list of resources mentioned here as soon as that recording is rendered. So we will be following up again soon, and appreciate everybody for attending. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.